Thank you so much, Mr. Bond, for joining us today. Like I already said, I'm super anxious, nervous, happy. If I could do a little jig, I would do it right away because the last time I was in Mussourie, Landor, and I visited the Cambridge bookstore and I got myself an autographed book. I was like a kid, who just suddenly found the best toy, and so did my children. I have to ask you, what's the magic of working and storytelling for kids right from 6 up to 80? Like, how does it work? How do you do it so effortlessly?
Oh gosh, I'm not sure. Just instinctively in a way, because I've been writing for so long, since I finished school, 1951, 52. So that's nearly 70 years. So just writing just comes naturally to me, like eating or sleeping or taking a walk. It's just part of my daily life in a way,
Right.
and it's a personal thing with me. So I'm really, in a way, when I write, I'm almost talking to myself. So if the reader feels I'm talking to him or her, well, that's fine. Huh? That's what I intend.
I read in your book that you shifted to Landor, Mussourie, because you felt that there was too much noise and it didn't, it helped you focus better. And while you grew up in Dera, in Shimla,
Yes.
in Mussoorie, a little bit in Jamnagar, and you went to London for some time. So between all these different cities, why have you decided to settle in Mussoorie?
Well, I grew up in the Doon Valley. That's
Yes,
Dehradun.
yes,
And also I went to school in Simla. So I'm used to actually small town life.
yeah,
And when I was living in Delhi in the early 1960s, for 3 or 4 years actually, and I found I wasn't writing too well, or not as well as I wanted to. And I thought, let me go up. I'll go up to the hills and see if I can work better there. So I came up here. It was about 1964, to a small cottage in the forest, not where I'm staying now. I'm on top of the mountain now. At that time, the cottage I took was down in the forest, a bit, down in a sort of ravine, and I was surrounded by trees of different types of trees, and birds and small animals too, and one or two big animals. So it did make a difference. I became, in a way, closer to nature
yes.
and to natural world, and it brought up perhaps I wasn't a different kind of writer, but maybe it just made writing a whole lot easier.
Right,
So that's it. Could have been anywhere else, but I chose Mussoorie because I knew the area.
right,
And I'd grown up in this part of the woods. And being
right.
a very personal sort of writer, I'm more at home in places with which I'm familiar.
Right. And you do such a brilliant job of that visual description that I remember it was one reading after reading your books that I actually traveled to Landor. And it just felt like each moment that I was there, I had read it somewhere in your books. How do you achieve that level of visual description so beautifully?
Thank you. I think I'm a good observer of the world around me. And over the years, I've sort of kept notebooks and little diaries and journals and put down observations, thoughts, interesting things that go on around me. So all that happens. So I sort of, in a way, trained myself to notice the little things, not just my desk, but the ladybird on the desk, or not just the window, but the bird at the window. So
Right,
all this helps maybe to make a place more vivid,
right.
and more personal too.
Mr. Bond, I have to ask you this question. You've been writing books for children for so long. How do you decide my very best stories? You've written so many books. How do you pick your favorite child?
I have to confess that I picked them with the help of my publisher or editor or family or friends. And so if the stories are your favorites, then they're my favorites too, in a way.
Right,
But because, in a way, I don't have any particular favorite, if I'm writing a particular story and I'm enjoying it, then at that moment that's the favorite. Later on, I might look back and have others that I enjoyed writing. In fact, I wouldn't finish a story unless I really enjoyed writing it. So
Right.
in a way, they're all favorites. Put everything I wrote all together, I probably wouldn't put them in any particular order of favoritism.
Miss Pond, I had a question with a generation that we're raising who's so obsessed with technology. Do you find it harder to make your stories come alive to them? Like, how do you entice a child who's literally got this and this in front of him?
Well, of course, technology has, in recent years, developed very quickly, left me far behind. So I'm totally technologically illiterate in a way. But, children and young people, in many ways, are no different from what they used to be 20, 30, 40 years ago when I was a boy, because their basic interests are the same. Let me see. They like to eat. They love food. uh, they uh, they um, they like seeing a film. They like movies. They like parties. They like going on hikes or having adventures. So those who are more adventurous, they like cricket. They like football. They like all the things that were always there. So it's
Yeah.
only so technology is only one aspect of life. And I've never bothered to try and change my writing. Young readers and old readers seem to um, accept the fact that here's an old-fashioned writer, and they like, some people like old-fashioned writers. So so there it is. I don't try to change in any way the way I write.
Right, but it's so relevant now that you say that the children like food, because when I'm reading your biography, you talk about the breakfast that you ate and the fabulous cook that you had. You talk about movies, and it takes me back to
Yes.
when you actually traded your gramophone records with Mr. Munn and actually got 2 years of free movies, watching free movies at the theater. So literally, and now when I'm thinking back, that's exactly what children like. You're absolutely right. Or whether it was
Yeah.
you getting selected in the football team at one point in time and being the captain. So absolutely.
Yeah, yes, that's true. There is, because I'm often writing about my boyhood, my childhood, and the boyhood, the childhood of today's boys and girls is in many ways the same, because they too have dreams, of what they want to do in life, of there are things that make them happy and things that make them sad, and all these imponderables, these problems, this sort of anxiety about the future too,
Yeah.
was there with me. It's there with young people today.
Right.
So in any way, the basics of life are
Yes.
still the
Yes.
same.
And they stay constant no matter which generation we are in. Really, really, you're absolutely right. It kind of stays constant. Mr. Bond, when there were so many different things to write about, why did you pick children's literature? Like, what was it about children's literature that said, this is what I want to write about?
Yes. Well, for the first 10 or 15 years of my writing career, I wasn't writing for children. I wasn't writing for any particular age. I was just writing for myself and for the general reader. And then it so happened that some of those stories and books were also appreciated by children, and they even got picked up and a few went into the school curriculum. And so people began to think of me as someone who wrote for children also. And then but I wasn't writing specifically for children till I was about 40. And then I said, well, let me write one or two books or stories for the young reader and not just for the general reader. And I think I began with The Blue Umbrella and Angry River, and these are storybooks that came out in the 1970s. And so then and they were and gradually over the years, I think I began to have more younger readers than older readers, and went into to.
They're far more
But
loyal, though.
but the young ones grew up and became old, and they and they wanted their children or grandchildren also to read my stories.
Absolutely.
So in a way, I've been writing for all ages. But now and then I consciously think in terms of the reader being a boy or a girl of 12 or 13 or 14, and I might not, and I might try to write a bit better because uh, because writing sometimes for children is more difficult than writing for adults.
Of
You
course.
see, an adult might put up with you for two, three boring chapters before throwing the book away. But a youngster, you have to catch his or her attention on page one or two.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, they're going to throw the book away. So
Totally.
there are challenges there. You have to tell a good story. You have to engage the attention of the reader. The reader must, in a way, identify with the character or the main character
Right.
in the story. So there are, uh, in a way, writing for children is more of a discipline
Right.
than writing entirely for adults.
Right. Mr.
And
Bond, if
and
I was
and, and I enjoy that discipline.
Sure. Mr. Bond, if I was to ask you this, that you actually mentioned that writing for children is far more difficult. You started, and the biggest struggle that we actually have, and I'm sure that it's the same thing with Crossword, or the biggest query we get on Kidsstoppress is, how do I get my child to read? And you pick up reading at a later, the love for reading
Yes,
at a much later age. So,
it
what
is
advice
difficult.
would you give to parents?
It is difficult to get a child to read. Here is Srishti, my granddaughter, holding the phone for me, and she she doesn't read my stories, but she reads other books. So I think you've got to let the child, your son or daughter, discover what they like and what
Right.
interests them, rather than rather than expect them to read what you like. Because they'll grow up with their own tastes, um, and and once they have found or discovered the kind of book they like, then they're readers for life too, just as we
Right.
are. So I think I've always even resented it over the years when someone has given me a book and said, Ruskin or Mr. Bond, you must read this. I sort of immediately back away. There's no such thing as must. I prefer to discover
Yeah.
discover books for myself. And I think that's the same with young people. They want to discover their own books or what they like, and sort of maybe back away if a book is forced on them or they're told this is a great book, you must read it. There's a natural sort of feeling that you'll read what you want to read and not what others want you to read.
Right. Mr. Bond, if I was to ask you, you said about observations, about how you observe every little thing, and that's kind of added a lot to how you write. Tell me, what's a typical day in your life when you're writing? Like, how does a day in the life of Ruskin Bond look like?
Well, nowadays with this coronavirus epidemic on, of course, we're all locked up or at home or working from home. I've found it. I've I have to confess that my writing output has doubled because I haven't. Don't go anywhere. I'm sitting here quite comfortably, and I find that instead of, and I'm not missing a day of writing because when times are normal, there are other things to do. You go somewhere, you might go traveling, you might go to a lit fest, or you go out for lunch. There's so many things you do, but
Distractions.
outside the home. But now there are only three things I do basically all day. One is I write. Second, I read, or maybe I read first and write second. I enjoy my meals, and I sleep a lot.
Your
So,
afternoon nap.
um,
Your afternoon
so,
nap.
um, so the writing has doubled and increased. But otherwise, a normal day would have been get up right in the mornings. I usually do most of my writing early morning. And that's a good time. And I try to do a little every day, but I don't force myself. because after all, it's got to be enjoyable. I
Right.
wouldn't. It's not. It shouldn't be a task. So I'll choose whatever time I like to write, and but in the course of the day, I will certainly do some reading. I'm still a great reader. Um, that goes back to my school days and boyhood, and then there are various other little things one can do, like staying in touch with publishers uh, and I avoid the telephone, but it does ring sometimes. And when things improve, I shall again go out for lunch or a walk and
Right.
maybe
Tell me your
visit.
frequent visits to the bookstore and, from people now earlier wanting to get the book autographed to now asking you to take a selfie or stop you in the middle of the roads and do that. Does that bother you? Is that a new
Well,
age vibe?
up to a point, it doesn't bother me. I mean, I used to go to the local bookshop, Cambridge Book Depot, and meet readers, and some of them would take selfies, and they're welcome to do so. Of course, it's a bit of a bother if tourists say come to the house unexpectedly and without warning when I might be working or sleeping or reading, and that can be a bit irritating at times. But otherwise, those regular trips to the bookshop, of course, have been postponed. But he still gets books signed by me, and he stays in touch with readers online. So online has been very helpful um, to a writer like me, who is not normally a technical person or a technological person.
But tell me, Mr. Bond, writing so many different books, how do you still keep it so novel and not let the reader feel like, oh, I read this in one of his earlier books? How do you, at the cost of not sounding repetitive, how do you
Yeah,
manage
well,
that?
yes, well, sometimes I do go back and write about the same period or about um, say school days or growing up in different places. I try to make it different. Um, because there are always people I maybe have not written about before, so they can come into new stories, and and of course sometimes I just invent people. Or after all, I'm a fiction writer basically, so sometimes I turn an incident or a character into a story, and weave a narrative around that person. At other times, it might be fairly well close to the actual experience. So there's an element of autobiography in much of what I write. At the same
Yeah,
time, I do fictionalize a great deal.
right.
So, um, which helps, of course.
Which I think is very, very special about your books because it literally, so one is that it's a blend between autobiography and fiction. So it literally feels like we've seen every aspect of your life in many ways. So we know you much closer, whether it's about Rusty the dog or whether it's about, your life at school or everything. So readers have literally grown through that journey, which I think is amazing.
That's true. I've written a lot out of my life, and I've tried to be honest. And maybe that's part of the appeal, is that I'm not holding back.
Yes.
So the reader often feels they're in a way part of my growing up, or part of the ex- part of my experiences, and I sort of try to draw them into it. Um, and I suppose practically every writer doesn't tell you everything about himself, but as I think I've been fairly candid and open in all my writing, and maybe that's given it a special appeal.
Absolutely. Mr. Bond, I have to ask you this question. Over the years, you've met so many children, so many parents. You've met so many children, so many parents.
Mhm.
What do you feel will be a few of the qualities that will be important for the 21st century children? because you've seen such a long lifespan. You've seen independence, you've seen the British rule, you've seen life after, and of course, growing up in a small town, growing up in a large city, and of course, in all your writings, right? What do you think will be the key values that the kids of tomorrow will really need?
A lot depends on parents, and I must say that in recent years, parents have become more conscious, I think, of their responsibilities and aware of the fact that their children should grow up with certain values and not just and have a feeling also for the environment. Now, the back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, we took the environment just for granted and really didn't look after it very well, and with the result that we have been paying for it more in recent years, with with all the effects on climate and with
Yes.
deforestation and so many
Forest fires.
and wildlife affected. But
Yes.
now I find that a lot of parents as well as teachers in schools particularly, they do inculcate the importance, I think, of looking after the world around us, the natural world, and the world which not only we have to live in, but which supports us in a way through because so much is at risk now in the way of this planet, which is unique in being practically the only green planet in the universe as far as we know, and that it has shown signs of deterioration, and basically because over the last few centuries, the human race has sort of had a
It.
devastating effect on it. And so, but now we are certainly more conscious, and the younger generation particularly is more conscious of this danger, and is trying to do something about it.
Sure. Sure. Mr. Bond, I have to
Does that
ask
help?
you this question. Who are your favorite authors?
Over the years, I've had so many favorite authors. They've changed. They haven't changed. They've always stayed favorites, but they're more and more favorites. Just as I can't pick a favorite story of my own, it's hard to pick on a favorite writer. But let's say the ones that influenced me, the writers that I grew up on as a schoolboy, would have been Dickens with his Copperfield and Pickwick and Nicholas Nickleby. I read all of them. And then other writers of that period who were good writers, like J.B. Priestley and Somerset Maugham and William Saroyan, and I read Conrad, and then later entertainers like P.J. Wodehouse and detective novelists like Agatha Christie. They're all favorites. I still read those writers, and discovered others along the way. And I'm always trying to find books that I've missed out on. But there's not much I've missed out on. I must have read, oh gosh, a few thousand books in my lifetime. And there are a few hundred in the house here, and I have to practically sleeping on top of them too. So in many ways, I'm a reader first and a writer second. Put it that way.
Right. We actually had a 13-year-old boy who's asked us this question. He's actually asked us, Mr. Bond, how do you define success? Are marks the only way to say that I'm successful?
Success, in a way, is I would say being able to lead your life and make a living by doing the thing that you enjoy, that you most want to do. And because you could perhaps maybe be successful or make a lot of money doing something else, but you may not enjoy doing it, or you wouldn't be happy. So success is actually goes hand in hand with happiness. And and both together, I think, depend a lot on your being free to do to be creative and to make a living out of what you really enjoy doing most. And in that sense, I've been very lucky in that for the greater part of these of my adult life, I've survived through my writing. Well, not just survived, but had a good life too. So, so I think that's important, and that would be my definition of success, and not just the material comforts that might come uh, from from a more material way of life.
So,
Success means be able to do the things you want to do within, of course, certain limitations, without harming
right,
anybody else.
of course. Um, Mr. Bond, three books that have really influenced you as an individual.
Three books that have really influenced me. Um, from the point of natural history and nature, there's a book called The Story of My Heart by Richard Jefferies, a classic written in the 1920s, I think. And that's about a man who, it's his autobiography, of a person who lived very close to nature. Um, then in the line of fiction, I would think maybe David Copperfield, because David grows up wanting to be a writer. And when I read that book, it put the germ in my head of wanting to be a writer too. And so David Copperfield would be two, and Copperfield's Story of My Heart, and then perhaps the third. So many, I mean, to choose from there. Um, Let me think of one more that would have influenced me greatly. Well, the shelf is just behind me. Something humorous, perhaps. The Diary of Nobody. And that's also not so well known as Wodehouse and other humorists, but it's worth reading. Yeah, again. So it, it it made me also want to write funny stories too from time to time, and not be too serious
Right.
in looking at life.
Sure. We've actually have a reader who's asking us the three life lessons you would want to share with all the children who are listening to you right now.
Three life lessons. Okay. Well, three life lessons. If you're going to run away from home, think twice about it. Because when I ran away from home, uh, on the second or third day, I got very hungry. and and I came back with my tail between my legs and said, "Mom, what's for lunch today?" So don't run away from home. Um, at the same time, be adventurous, and if you've grown up, you finish school, college, and you want to travel or go around the world, go. It's important, I think, also you must experience something of the world, the rest of the world around you. It'll help you to be a better writer or a better person all round. And the third, what was the third experience? Life experience that's important. You have to learn to cope with failure. Very important. Because I think that failure comes to all of us at some time in our lives. I've had periods of failure when things just didn't turn out, go the way I wanted them to. Because the more failures you have in a way, and you learn from them, and and they help you to go on and to do something better. So fail once, try again, fail again, fail better. But you, in a way, the more you fail, the more you'll succeed. Put it that way.
Right. That's incredible. That's incredible advice. Fail better. I'm gonna bookmark that one for myself. We've actually got young writers who've been asking us that what is, they sometimes feel that they can't write or they feel a writer's block. What's your thought process when you begin writing? Like, what's your structure to writing, if at all?
I'm often asked that question about writer's block, and it does happen to most writers that you get. Maybe there's a period in your life when you're not writing the way you want to, or you're working on a particular book or story, or you get stuck halfway through. It happens to you at school when you're doing an essay and in an exam, and you're halfway through the essay you're writing, and you come to a stop and say, now what do I write next? So actually, I won't sit down to write a story or an essay unless I've done it in my head first. So you do it in your head, you see it as a picture, almost like a movie, and then you know what you're going to write. You know, the beginning, the middle, and the end. The characters are there, the plot is there. So it's only a question then of putting it into words and good sentences, and because you've already got the concept. So you must see it in your head first. And I think that applies to any literary work, to a story, to an essay, to a novel, to an answer to a question paper even. Visualize it, and then put it down. Does that help?
Yes.
And if it doesn't help, and if that doesn't work, well, keep a waste paper basket close at hand and get rid of it.
Right. No, that was incredibly helpful. I also want to ask you this question, which we often get. We also have a lot of Goodreads and bestsellers and all of that, but a large part of the Indian authors, right? I mean, you've obviously achieved so much fame, but a lot of the Indian authors really get ignored in the process. So, your message to parents on why kids should read Indian authors?
Yes, well, Indian authors, there are so many now, you know, but if you go back to the 1950s, 60s, when I set out to write, there were very few then who, writing wasn't very fashionable or very popular, especially in India. And it's amazing how in recent years, writing has become a popular profession, and we have now hundreds of Indian authors who are publishing here and abroad. And I think it's partly because the spread of education and more uh, young people are growing up with a good command of language, because that's important, and want to have something to say, express themselves. They may not necessarily make writing their profession, but a good command of language will help you in whatever your career you undertake. Whether you
Right.
become a a doctor or a scientist or a business person, it helps tremendously. But writing too as a profession now can bring in an income, which it could not do 40, 50 years back. We had hardly any book publishers here. I used
Right.
to, for the first 20 years of my writing life, be writing for magazines and newspapers, for their Sunday sections. But now we've got a lot of publishers and lots of writers, and things are looking pretty healthy on the literary front.
Right.
So I never discourage a young person from writing, but I do urge them to be patient and not to expect to become famous overnight. because sometimes it can take years to get established. And sometimes young people are impatient and maybe persuade their mommy and daddy to invest in publishing a book of their juvenile work, which they might regret later on and feel that they should have waited a little longer. But never mind. If you want to express yourself as a writer, go ahead. I would never discourage any young person from writing.
Right, absolutely. That brings us to a lot of user questions that we actually have at the moment. I'm struggling to keep pace with the amount of questions that we have, but we've actually got a reader asking in that when you sometimes failed or did not know what lies ahead of you, what did you tell yourself?
Well, there's a lot of times when I didn't know what was ahead of me. And at the same time, over the years, especially when I was younger, if things got difficult, I wouldn't hesitate to take a job or do something that would bring in an income for a certain amount of time. I must have had in my lifetime about 6 different jobs, but I never kept them for very long because as soon as I could get back on my feet with my books or writing, I would give up the job. So I've had, when I was in England, I worked for a travel agency. I worked as a clerk. I worked in a photographic firm, came back to India. I once worked for CARE, which was a relief organization. I've edited a couple of magazines over the years. So I've done a lot of things, and why not? You must be prepared to do different things sometimes. Huh? But let's say that of the 70 years I've been writing, I would say I think a good, at least 60 have been spent entirely in as a writer
Right.
on a professional note. That is making my living from my work, from my writing.
Sure. Mr. Bond, we've actually got a child asking question. I am Nishad. I'm 8 years old. Do any of the real people you mention in your books also read your books? What is their reaction when they read your stories?
The people I write about, let me tell you a secret. They never recognize themselves.
That
I have
that's
not.
what a good writer
I've
can
written
do.
about. I've written about so many people. They don't recognize themselves. They don't believe it. They said that can't be me. Hmm? I can promise you.
That
Unless
that
you
is
actually give their name and address and then tell you what they're, what who identify them. They very often they don't recognize themselves. They'll say, "I can't be so clever," or "I can't be so stupid." But people don't recognize themselves. I promise you.
okay. That's incredible. Somebody's
Yes.
asked you this. What is writing to you? Is it an art or a talent for life
Is it an art or a
Talent.
or a
talent?
talent?
Well, it's both in a way. You need talent to write, but the actual process of writing is an art. To write well is an art. Of course, sometimes apart from being a talent, you can have the great writers are geniuses. But even otherwise, I think anyone who writes a book must have some talent. So, but the actual whether it's good writing is an art. You can also have something like bad writing, which is not an art.
Right. We've got somebody asking this question, which is why are very few Indian writers able to make an impact on global readers?
Well, they have. No, that's not true. A lot of Indian writers have made an impact globally. I mean, you go back to, of course, Rabindranath Tagore, who got the Nobel Prize back in, I think, in the 1917, perhaps. And then you've had in the when I grew up, when I was at school, we had writers like R.K. Narayan and Mulkrajanand and Raja Rao, so many who were published abroad because we didn't have many publishers in India, as I mentioned, but still they managed to get published abroad. And then in more recent years, there have been Indian writers who've made an impact internationally. You can think of Rushdie, who was originally lived in Bombay. No doubt he's a British subject now. And then you had Vikram Seth. You've had so many who have made an impact. And the reason is because they're using the English language in a way, which is an international language. And if you want to get published in the USA or in Britain or in Australia or New Zealand or Canada, you have to use English. Although now, hopefully, and in the future too, we will have more Indian language writers, regional writers, getting translated into English and other languages and making an impact abroad.
Right.
So I think it's increased over the years, the number of Indian writers who do make an impact. Not all of them do, because some may not have a universal appeal. In fact, my appeal is basically in India rather than abroad. I think 90% of my readers are here because I'm writing about Indian children and about this country where I've spent all my life and to which I belong. So I think but things have got better for Indian writers over the years, and certainly will continue to do so.
Sure. Before we ask the last question for everybody, Mr. Bond's latest book is now out at the Crossword bookstore. So if you guys want to get that, we put the link in the comment box below. So make sure that you check that out. And Mr. Bond, the last question we're actually going to ask you is, that how has this people want to ask perspective of experiencing this lockdown as a storyteller for you. How has it been?
Well, for me, it's been very useful. But of course, I feel sympathetic and sorry for all the young people who've got shut up at home when they'd love to be going out to play games or to a party or to the pictures or go for a walk, or there's so many things that young people are missing. Here I am, 86, quite happy. And, just, I'm looked after so beautifully. So for me, it's fine, but it's not fine for everybody else.
Right. Mr. Bond, this is
holding
yeah, I'm sorry he's tired already.
camera
His
to me.
hand is hurting now.
No, I'm not trying to go out.
Yeah. Sorry?
Yeah, Shrishti, for everybody who doesn't know, Shrishti is his granddaughter, and she's been holding the phone for the last 49 minutes.
Yes. She's been holding it for an hour nearly.
So, Mr. Bond, thank you.
Because her laptop wasn't connecting, you see, to you there. And
this has been
because
incredible.
the weather is raining all the time anyway, so we wouldn't be going out in any case, I think. But
right.
It's been raining a lot.
Right.
But it's been very useful for me from the writing point of view. I can't complain.
Right. Before we end, the last question that everybody wants to ask as a writer is it important to bare your soul and be vulnerable to your reader?
It's not for every writer doesn't bare his soul or her soul. Some do. You see, you get two kinds of writers. You get the subjective writer who writes from within his or herself, from your heart, as I do. Such writers like I think of, Emily Bronte, Wuthering Heights, where it's passionate and the writer does bare her soul. And I'm that kind of writer. But then there are others who will write detached, be very detached from their subject or from their characters, will tell a story, but will not be involved in it. They're not putting themselves into it. So they're objective writers. So there are two kinds of writers, in fact, many kinds of writers. Huh? And some of us bare our souls because in a way we're writing for ourselves. Others won't tell you much about themselves at all. And so it doesn't matter, whichever you like.
Sure, sure. Mr. Bond, thank you so much for all our listeners and readers right now. We've put the link to where you can get the book at Crossword, and we're going to be giving 2 books away. So please fill in the form. And what we'd also love for you to do is, if you love this interview, please do take screenshots and tag us on Instagram. Mr. Bond actually has an Instagram account, which is called the official Ruskin Bond. Or it's called Ruskin Bond Official. How are you keeping up with technology? I think I give the credit to Shrishti.
I don't. How do I keep up with technology?
Oh, we are handling the Instagram.
I don't do any technology. It all has Shifty here doing it all.
Shrishti, you're doing a fabulous job.
Yes, I mean everybody else. I don't keep a phone. I don't keep a laptop. Nothing. But everybody else has one. So I'm very cunning. I depend on them. And I just sit back and enjoy life.
That is amazing. That is absolutely amazing for everybody. Please do take the screenshots and tag Crossword, Aleph, Kidsstoppress, and Mr. Bond most definitely with your key takeaways. Sir, thank you so much for spending this hour with us, and can't wait to be reading this one.
Thank you for all the nice questions, yours and the children's. Huh?
Thank you. Thank you.